He was a man who believed love was a weakness. A ruthless millionaire CEO who only cared about numbers, deals, and power. But one evening, as he walked into a hospital room he never thought he'd visit, his entire world stopped. There she was, the woman he left behind, lying pale on a hospital bed. And beside her stood a little girl, clutching a drawing that said "My Daddy." For the first time in years, the unshakable man felt his knees give out. He didn't know this child existed, or that his past mistake had created something so pure. Now, standing face to face with the truth he once rejected, he had to decide, was he still the man who believed love was a distraction, or the father who finally understood what truly mattered? Ethan Kross was the kind of man people feared before they respected him. At just 34, he was already the youngest millionaire CEO in the city, a name that echoed through glass boardrooms and luxury magazines. But behind that perfectly tailored suit and emotionless stare was a man who once believed in love. Years ago, before the money, before the empire, there was Lena, the woman who taught him to dream. She was kind, full of light, and everything Ethan wasn't. But when his business began to grow, his priorities shifted. He called it ambition, she called it distance. And one night, after another argument about time and love, Lena left without a word, without a goodbye. For Ethan, losing her was the final lesson. He decided love was a distraction, a weakness that slowed strong men down. From that day, he made a silent promise: never again. Years passed, and Ethan built an empire out of cold logic and relentless drive. He had everything: penthouses, cars, awards, everything except the feeling he once thought was dangerous. To the world, he was perfect, but his nights were silent, his meals lonely, and his heart frozen. Until one afternoon, his assistant rushed into his office with a strange look. "Sir," she said softly, "you need to come to the hospital." He frowned. "Why would I?" The woman hesitated. "It's about someone named Lena. She's not well." Her name hit him like a storm he thought had passed. Lena, he hadn't heard it in years. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and left the building, something he hadn't done in the middle of work for as long as he could remember. The hospital hallway was quiet, filled with the faint smell of medicine and memories. When Ethan stepped into the room, he froze. There she was, Lena, pale, fragile, her hair a little shorter, her hands weak against the blanket. His chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to ask what happened, but before he could, a small voice came from behind him. "Mommy, who's that man?" Ethan turned. A little girl stood there, maybe 5 years old, with Lena's eyes and his jawline. In her tiny hands was a drawing, a man, a woman, and a child holding hands under a blue sky. Across the top, in shaky letters, it read, "My Daddy." His heart stopped. He looked at Lena, who could barely meet his eyes. "Is she?" Lena nodded faintly. "Her name's Emma." For the first time in his adult life, Ethan didn't know what to do. The man who commanded thousands of employees couldn't speak a single word. He knelt instinctively, without thinking until he was eye level with the girl. "Hi," he said quietly. "I'm Ethan." She smiled shyly. "Mommy said my daddy was brave. Are you him?" Tears he didn't know he still had blurred his vision. And in that moment, every wall he had built around his heart began to crack. Ethan Kross had faced investors, scandals, and boardroom betrayals, but nothing terrified him like the small child now holding his finger. He didn't know how to breathe, how to act, how to be. Emma looked up at him with wonder, her world so simple. While his felt impossibly complicated, Lena's voice was weak but steady. "You don't have to stay. I know what you think about distractions." Her words cut him deeper than she knew. Years ago, he had chosen ambition over her. He'd said, "Love makes men lose focus." And now, standing in a hospital room beside the only woman he ever loved and the daughter he never knew existed, he felt every inch of that arrogance collapse. He turned to Lena. "Why didn't you tell me?" She smiled faintly, sadness softening her expression. "Because you didn't believe in love anymore, Ethan, and Emma. She deserves to be loved without being a burden to your empire." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in his car outside the hospital, staring at the empty steering wheel, his reflection in the windshield, a stranger. He wasn't thinking about contracts or profit margins. He was thinking about a drawing, 3 stick figures under a blue sky. The little girl's handwriting echoed in his mind. "My daddy." By morning, he made his decision. For the first time in years, he canceled every meeting and returned to the hospital. Lena was surprised when she saw him sitting by Emma's bed, reading her a storybook. "Mr. Kross," the nurse whispered later, "I didn't know you had a daughter." Ethan looked up and smiled for the first time in years. "Neither did I." Days turned into weeks. Ethan found himself visiting daily at first, awkwardly standing near the door, and then slowly becoming part of Emma's small world. She would talk endlessly about her drawings, her favorite songs, and how mommy makes the best pancakes. Ethan listened, really listened, and each word stitched together a version of him he thought was long gone. One afternoon, as they painted together, Emma looked up and said, "Mommy said you used to make her laugh. Why don't you anymore?" He froze. Lena turned, surprised. "Emma." But Ethan only smiled, brushing a stroke of paint on the paper. "I guess I forgot how to," he said softly. "Then you can learn again." Emma replied innocently. The words hit harder than any business loss ever could. Lena began to heal slowly, both in body and spirit. The tension between her and Ethan softened, replaced by quiet understanding. They would share coffee at the hospital cafe, sometimes talking about old times, sometimes just sitting in silence. He apologized, once really apologized, not with words, but with presence. When she asked, "Why are you here, Ethan?" he replied, "Because this time, I don't want to miss what actually matters." As weeks passed, Lena was discharged. Ethan offered to help, but she hesitated. "I don't want your pity or your wealth," she said. He nodded. "Then take my time. It's the only thing I can't buy, and the only thing I'm finally willing to give." That night, he sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by everything and everyone, yet emptier than ever. On his desk lay a framed photo Emma had given him before they left, a crayon drawing of the three of them again, this time with him holding Lena's hand. Under it, in tiny handwriting, Emma had added one more line, this time, "Don't forget love." The boardroom was silent, not the usual kind of silence before a decision, but the kind that follows after someone changes the rules. Ethan stood before his executives, the same men who once worshipped his discipline and cold precision. They waited for him to speak, expecting his familiar iron tone. But when he did, his voice was calm, almost gentle. "Gentlemen," he said, setting the file down. "For years, I believed success meant sacrifice. That to build an empire, I had to destroy the man who could love. I was wrong." A few exchanged glances, confusion, disbelief. Ethan smiled faintly. "This company will run fine without me for a while. I have more important meetings now." He walked out, leaving them stunned outside. A familiar sound cut through the echo of city horns' laughter. Tiny, unfiltered laughter. Emma ran up the steps of the marble plaza, waving a sketchbook. "Daddy, I drew something." The word daddy used to feel like a title he hadn't earned. Now it felt like a promise he would never break. He knelt down, adjusting her little coat, and opened the book. Inside was another drawing. This time, a house, a sun, and a stick figure with a heart on his chest. "That's you," Emma said proudly. "Mummy said your heart was sleeping, but I think it's awake now." Ethan laughed softly, tears threatening to fall. "Yeah," he said, his voice cracking. "It's very awake." Later that evening, he visited Lena. She was standing by her small apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the city gold. When she turned, the sight of him holding a bouquet felt both strange and familiar. "Flowers," she said softly, a faint smile forming. He chuckled. "I had to start somewhere." She crossed her arms. "You don't have to do this, Ethan. You've already done more than I ever expected." He stepped closer. "I'm not doing this to make up for the past. I'm doing it because the man who left you doesn't exist anymore." She looked at him, searching for a lie, but found none. "You said love was a distraction," she whispered. He nodded. "It was until it became the only thing worth focusing on." Days turned into something new. Ethan wasn't the ruthless CEO anymore. He was a man learning how to cook breakfast with a 5-year-old critic. He was a man who showed up to kindergarten plays in suits worth millions, just to clap the loudest. He was a man who, for the first time in his life, felt small, in the best possible way. And Lena, she saw it all. The man who once ruled the city now knelt on a living room floor, covered in paint and crayons, smiling as if he'd conquered the universe. One rainy night, as they sat by the window watching the city lights, Lena said quietly, "You've changed, Ethan." He turned to her, his eyes soft. "You and Emma changed me. You showed me what real wealth looks like." She smiled, and for the first time since he'd let her go, she reached for his hand. Outside, thunder rolled softly, but in that small room, everything was calm. Ethan leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. For once, he whispered, "I'm exactly where I want to be." And for the first time in years, the Millionaire CEO didn't feel like a king, he felt like a man who finally came home. He once believed love was weakness, He built towers of glass and power, but they never reflected the warmth he lost. Until one voice, one innocent word, Daddy, shattered the silence around his heart. Ethan Cross, the man who once walked away from love, finally knelt, not in defeat, but in surrender to what truly mattered, because sometimes, life doesn't punish you, it teaches you through the hearts you break, and the ones brave enough to forgive you. She didn't need his empire, she needed his heart. And when he gave that, he finally found everything he'd been chasing in boardrooms and balance sheets. Love doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. Subscribe for more powerful love stories where money fades, but emotions never do. #LoveAfterPain. #emotional story. #millionaire CEO.